I have released Diddy's documentary on Netflix, and I have given all the proofs of who was involved with Diddy. I have presented the videotape of Diddy's parties as evidence. Now no one can save Diddy and the other celebs. After watching the rest of the documentary, you'll understand everything.
I am the fucking hardest hustler in the world. This is Savage Part 2. Don't tell me about shit. It's 2022 and I'm still a savage. Whatever I want, I get. Whatever I want, I fucking get.
You guys don't need to worry about me getting revenge from Diddy. I've got 3 moves that make sure he'll never be able to come after me or my family. First, I personally reached out to the victims' legal teams. The real reason he's not getting out is those buried cases behind the scenes. I provided legal funding for 7 victims who had been silent for years and brought in the top criminal attorneys in the country. Second, I bought up every potential post-release business deal he had lined up. I planned this 2 years in advance, so by the time he got sentenced and still had hope of getting out, every partner had already cut ties with him. Third, I don't just have evidence, I've got backups. This is an entire minefield that's been buried for 20 years. I uncovered every secret from the last 30 years. With testimonies from the victims, we interviewed over a dozen people he tricked, threatened, or violated. You think that's harsh? No, he destroyed other people's lives for decades. I'm just making sure he spends a few extra years in prison for it. I'm not afraid of his people, not afraid of his threats. I know he's still in there fantasizing about a comeback, but the truth is, he's never coming back.
They weren't parties. They were permissions, secret locations, closed doors, late-night gatherings where cameras were never invited. This wasn't the world you saw on stage. This was the world behind it. For years, whispers followed Diddy. Not rumors screamed, rumors protected. Buried under power, fame, and silence. And Snoop Dogg? Always close enough to know, always distant enough to deny. Young faces appeared. Questions were raised, quietly, then ignored. On December 2nd, 2025, 50 Cent broke the silence with a 4-part documentary. But even then, not everything was said. Now 50 Cent is back. A new Netflix documentary. More names, more detail, less protection. Because some secrets don't disappear. They wait. And what was hidden behind those closed doors was never meant to stay hidden forever. Private locations, not clubs, not public events, places chosen because no one was watching. Private rooms, away from hallways, away from staff, away from anything that could record what was said. According to 50 Cent, meetings involving Diddy and Snoop Dogg were carefully planned. Not just who was invited, but when. Timing mattered, late hours, off days, moments when attention was elsewhere. These weren't casual conversations. These were discussions that never made it outside the room. No witnesses, no recordings, no follow-up. What was said stayed there. What was decided stayed protected. And according to 50 Cent, that silence wasn't accidental. It was the point. Restricted access meant everything. If you weren't invited, you weren't supposed to know it existed. These weren't open parties. No flyers, no announcements, no accidental guests wandering in. Every name was checked. Every face was familiar. And if you didn't belong, the door never opened. According to 50 Cent, these gatherings weren't built for fun. They were built for control. Control over who entered, control over who stayed, and most importantly, control over what could ever be repeated. Phones were handled early, sometimes collected, sometimes discouraged, sometimes made unnecessary by unspoken rules. Everyone understood the expectation before anything began. No photos, no videos, no proof. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. Music played, but quieter than expected. Laughter existed, but never carried beyond the room. Everything felt intentional, staged to look casual, while being anything but. Diddy didn't host these spaces by accident. According to 50 Cent, these closed-door parties were designed with one goal in mind, to leave no trace. People came and went, but stories never followed them out. Not because nothing happened, but because everyone knew what silence was worth. Certain faces appeared again and again, always present, never introduced, always close, yet never explained. And then there were the moments that made people uncomfortable, the pauses in conversation, the sudden changes in tone, the feeling that something important was happening just out of reach. No one asked questions. Questions weren't welcome there. According to 50 Cent, these parties didn't rely on security guards or written rules. They relied on fear, on loyalty, on the understanding that being invited once meant being trusted, and being trusted meant knowing when to forget. Not even Snoop Dogg's name appears around these nights, not loudly, not officially, but close enough to matter, close enough to suggest awareness, close enough to raise questions that were never answered. When the night ended, nothing followed it. No headlines, no leaks, no consequences. Just people leaving quietly, carrying memories they would never confirm from rooms that officially never existed. And according to 50 Cent, that wasn't coincidence. That was the system working exactly as it was designed. After midnight, everything changed. These gatherings didn't start when the city was awake. They began when attention disappeared, when clubs closed, when streets emptied, when no one was looking for anything unusual. These were after-hours nights, beyond schedules, beyond visibility, beyond accountability. According to 50 Cent, the real activity didn't happen under lights or cameras. It happened late, quietly, in places that only came alive when the rest of the world shut down. Sunrise was the deadline. Whatever happened before, it was expected to disappear with the night. There were no itineraries, no official locations, just messages passed quietly. Timing understood without explanation. Names kept resurfacing in these accounts. Diddy, Snoop Dogg, industry insiders who always seemed to know where to be and when. Not every night looked the same, but the pattern never changed. Music stayed low, doors stayed closed, and the atmosphere felt different, heavier, more intentional. According to 50 Cent, these weren't wild celebrity parties meant to be seen. They were controlled environments, places where time slowed down, where roles blurred, where nothing needed to be explained. People came in quietly, left the same way. No announcements, no goodbyes. Some faces looked too young, some interactions felt out of place, but no one stopped anything. Stopping things wasn't part of the culture. Questions were swallowed, concerns were buried, because after hours meant rules didn't apply the same way. What made these nights powerful wasn't what happened. It was what didn't happen afterward. No posts, no interviews, no crazy night stories told later. Just silence. According to 50 Cent, that silence was earned through influence, through fear, through the understanding that certain doors only stay open if nothing ever escapes them. By morning, everything reset. People went back to their public lives, smiling, performing, pretending the night never existed, and officially, it didn't. In no records, no witnesses, no trace, just repeated accounts of the same names, the same timing, the same disappearing nights. Nights that lived only until sunrise and then vanished without a sound. Publicly, everything looked controlled, calculated, clean. Every appearance was measured, every interview polished, every image carefully protected. But according to 50 Cent, what people saw was never the full story. Behind the scenes, a different life existed. One that never made it to headlines. One that never needed explanations. Relationships were kept quiet, not because they were temporary, but because they were never meant to be seen. Diddy understood the power of perception. What the public believed mattered more than what was true. So anything that didn't fit the image was pushed out of sight. According to 50 Cent, certain connections were maintained far from cameras. No public appearances, no confirmations, no denials. Only a tight inner circle knew who was involved and who wasn't supposed to be mentioned. These weren't casual encounters. They were ongoing, carefully managed, protected by silence. People close enough to know learned quickly what not to say. Names were avoided, details never shared, even among friends. And when questions surfaced, they never lasted long. They were redirected, dismissed, forgotten. Because the system didn't rely on lies, it relied on omission. What wasn't shown couldn't be challenged. What wasn't acknowledged couldn't be proven. According to 50 Cent, this separation between public image and private reality wasn't accidental. It was strategic, a way to move freely while appearing untouchable. Some relationships lasted years without ever existing publicly. Others disappeared overnight, leaving no trace behind them. And through it all, the image remained intact, successful, untouched, unquestioned, until now. Because when silence holds something for too long, it doesn't erase it, it preserves it. Some concerns were never spoken out loud. They didn't need to be. They showed up in glances, in pauses, in the way conversations suddenly stopped when certain people entered the room. According to 50 Cent, there were moments at Diddy's events that made people uneasy, not because of what was happening openly, but because of who was present. The ages didn't always sit right. The atmosphere shifted when questions couldn't be asked without consequences. Nothing was ever announced. Nothing was ever confirmed. But the discomfort was real enough to be remembered. According to 50 Cent, certain presences raised quiet alarms. Not loudly, not publicly, but deeply. People noticed, then looked away. Because addressing it meant crossing a line no one wanted to cross. A line protected by power, influence, and fear of being shut out. No one pulled out a phone. No one wrote anything down. No one wanted their name attached to a question that could end a career. So silence followed. Always. The nights moved on. The music kept playing, and the moments that felt wrong were buried under excuses and distractions. According to 50 Cent, this wasn't about one incident. It was about a pattern of discomfort that never reached daylight. A pattern people learned to ignore because ignoring it was safer. Nothing ever became official. No statements, no explanations. We just memories shared in whispers, and then never again. Because in those spaces, silence wasn't neutral. It was enforced. And what made it unsettling wasn't what could be proven. It was what everyone seemed to understand without ever saying it. Questions existed. Answers never came. And the quiet that followed was louder than any accusation ever could be. There was always a line, clear, carefully guarded, what the public saw and what was never meant to be seen. According to 50 Cent, that separation wasn't accidental. It was intentional, maintained over years with discipline and control. A public persona built to project certainty, strength, authority, and a private life kept completely out of reach. According to 50 Cent, certain parts of Diddy's personal world were protected with extreme care, not discussed, not hinted at, not allowed to surface. People close enough to know understood the rules immediately. What you saw stayed where you saw it. What you heard stayed unspoken. There were no loose ends, no accidental confirmations, no moments left to interpretation. Privacy wasn't just requested, it was enforced. According to 50 Cent, this secrecy required constant effort, controlled environments, trusted inner circles, carefully chosen spaces where nothing could leak. Anything that didn't align with the public image was removed from visibility entirely. No overlap, no crossover, no mistakes. And when rumors surfaced, they were drowned out, redirected, or dismissed before they could grow. Because the image mattered more than the truth, and protecting it meant never allowing questions to become conversations. According to 50 Cent, this wasn't about denial. Homie, it was about separation, keeping one life visible and the other completely untouchable. Nothing was ever confirmed, nothing was ever explained. Just silence, maintained for years by design. And in that silence, the line between public perception and private reality remained exactly where it was meant to be. Unseen, unquestioned, and fully protected. Power moved quietly in these spaces, not loudly, not publicly, but with intention. Certain names didn't need introductions. They arrived already understood, already accepted. According to 50 Cent, powerful figures didn't cross paths by coincidence. They moved privately, carefully, always away from where anyone could connect the dots. In public, distance was maintained. Separate appearances, separate narratives. Nothing that suggested closeness. But behind closed doors, familiarity replaced distance. Conversations picked up without explanation. Comfort replaced formality. As if history already existed. Diddy knew how to manage proximity, who could be seen together, and who could never be documented in the same room. According to 50 Cent, some connections were too valuable to expose, too powerful to risk interpretation, so they stayed off the record. Names like Snoop Dogg surfaced quietly in these circles, Not announced, not promoted, but present enough to matter. Publicly, everything looked separate. Different lanes, different worlds, different stories. Privately, those lines blurred. There were shared spaces the public never saw. Moments that didn't need witnesses. Agreements that never needed signatures. According to 50 Cent, these weren't casual celebrity friendships. They were strategic relationships, built on mutual understanding, protected by mutual silence. Nothing was ever confirmed, nothing was ever denied, because confirmation wasn't necessary. The absence of evidence became the protection itself. People outside the circle never noticed, and those inside knew better than to speak. Because in an industry driven by visibility, the most powerful connections were the ones no one could prove. And according to 50 Cent, that invisibility wasn't accidental. It was the reason those relationships survived for as long as they did. Untouched, unquestioned, and completely off the record. Some stories never reached daylight, not because they were false, but because they were inconvenient. They surfaced quietly, passed from person to person in low voices, never written down, never officially reported. According to 50 Cent, there were allegations that stayed trapped behind closed doors, claims of behavior that crossed lines, in spaces where accountability didn't exist. Nothing happened in public. Nothing where witnesses could step forward safely. Everything unfolded in private rooms, protected environments, controlled circles, and when people talked about it later, they didn't talk loudly. Because influence changes consequences. According to 50 Cent, those allegations didn't disappear on their own. They were pushed down, smothered, ignored by people who understood the cost of speaking. Fear did the rest. Careers were fragile. Access was everything. And questioning powerful figures meant risking both. So stories stayed incomplete. Details faded. Timelines blurred. Not because nothing happened, but because no one was willing to stand alone. According to 50 Cent, the system didn't need threats or warnings. Everyone already knew what silence was worth. Influence acted as insulation. Fame softened scrutiny, and proximity to power created protection. When concerns surfaced, they were reframed, minimized, dismissed as misunderstandings or exaggerations, and eventually they stopped surfacing at all. Not because the behavior changed, but because the environment made reporting impossible. According to 50 Cent, this wasn't a single story, it was a pattern, one that repeated quietly over time. Behind closed doors, behind influence, behind fear, nothing ever became official, no statements, no records, no accountability. Just allegations suspended in silence, waiting for a moment when being quiet no longer felt safer than telling the truth. And that moment, according to 50 Cent, is getting closer than it's ever been before. Some people were always there, not occasionally, not by chance, always. They appeared at the same locations, the same nights, the same private spaces. Yet their names were never spoken publicly. According to 50 Cent, these weren't random faces drifting in and out. They were constants, part of an inner circle that never changed, even as everything else did. No introductions were needed, no explanations were offered. Their presence was treated as normal, even when it raised questions. They weren't listed as staff. They weren't credited as business partners. They weren't acknowledged as friends. They were just there. According to 50 Cent, Diddy was rarely alone in private settings. He was surrounded by people whose roles were never defined, people who didn't fit any official category. They didn't speak much. They didn't draw attention, but they were always close enough to matter. Some handled logistics, some controlled access, some simply observed, but none of it was ever explained, and no one asked, because asking meant stepping outside the circle, and once you were outside, you didn't get back in. According to 50 Cent, these unspoken connections created insulation, a buffer between actions and accountability, a layer of people who absorbed responsibility without ever carrying names. They knew when to move, when to stay silent, when to disappear before morning. Their loyalty wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was proven by presence, night after night, event after event. And that consistency is what made them invisible. Because familiarity stopped people from questioning why the same faces kept appearing, why they always had access, why they were never explained. According to 50 Cent, this wasn't coincidence. It was design, an inner circle built to operate without scrutiny, without titles, without records, faces always present, never mentioned, and in an industry where visibility is currency, being unseen was the most powerful role of all. Some relationships were never meant to be understood. They existed in a space where clarity was dangerous, privately maintained, carefully balanced, always close enough to matter, never clear enough to challenge. According to 50 Cent, these ties were built to stay off the record, no confirmations, no denials, no statements that could be quoted later. Ambiguity wasn't a flaw, it was protection. If nothing was acknowledged, nothing could be questioned. If nothing was defined, nothing could be held accountable. People knew there were connections. They felt them. They saw the familiarity, the access, the quiet coordination. But they could never prove it. And that uncertainty became the shield. According to 50 Cent, this strategy worked because it confused responsibility. Who was involved? In what way? For how long? No one could say for sure, because every relationship existed just outside certainty, just beyond confirmation, always implied, never documented. If someone asked directly, there was nothing to answer, no evidence, no admission, no denial strong enough to challenge. Silence did the work. According to 50 Cent, when this allowed powerful figures to move freely, to maintain influence without exposure, to benefit from closeness while avoiding consequences. Nothing official meant nothing actionable, and over time people stopped asking, not because they believed nothing was there, but because they understood how carefully it was hidden. These off-record relationships didn't disappear. They endured, protected by confusion, strengthened by silence, and insulated by the fact that accountability requires clarity, and clarity was never allowed to exist. According to 50 Cent, that wasn't accidental. It was the system operating exactly as intended, quiet, untouchable, and impossible to pin down. Some alliances were never meant to be seen. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't need to. They operated quietly, behind stages, behind contracts, behind public narratives that suggested separation where alignment actually existed. What the public saw were individual lanes, different brands, different stories, different paths. But according to 50 Cent, those lanes often merged where no one was looking. Behind the scenes, coordination replaced coincidence. Moves lined up too cleanly. Decisions echoed across spaces that were supposed to be disconnected. Publicly, distance was maintained. No obvious partnerships, no shared spotlights, nothing that suggested strategy. Privately, alignment told a different story. According to 50 Cent, Diddy and Snoop Dogg were repeatedly linked to industry alliances that never appeared on record. Relationships built on influence rather than visibility. These weren't friendships meant for fans. They were understandings meant for leverage, who to support, who to block, when to stay quiet, when to move together without ever being seen together. Nothing was written down, nothing was announced, because official alliances create accountability, and invisibility avoids it. According to 50 Cent, this private alignment shaped outcomes people never questioned. Careers shifted, opportunities appeared or vanished, stories changed direction overnight, and no one could ever point to why, because publicly, everyone stood apart. Privately, decisions were shared. These alliances didn't need meetings in boardrooms. They happened in private rooms, late nights, quiet conversations that never reached daylight. The power wasn't in being seen together. It was in never being connected at all. According to 50 Cent, that separation was deliberate, a way to influence the industry without carrying fingerprints. No contracts, no headlines, no proof, just alignment hidden behind distance. And in an industry built on exposure, the most effective alliances were the ones the public never knew existed, operating silently, shaping outcomes, while appearing completely unrelated on the surface. Some accusations refused to fade, not because they were loud, they were one-away, but because they were consistent. They were never proven, never validated in court, never officially confirmed, but they never disappeared either. According to 50 Cent, these claims lingered in the background long after people stopped talking about them publicly. They survived in fragments, in half-finished stories, in warnings passed quietly from one person to another. Nothing ever reached a conclusion, no clear ending, no resolution that could put the questions to rest. Even after 50 Cent released his first four-part documentary, the silence didn't feel complete. It felt interrupted. Some answers came out, others stayed locked away, and the accusations remained suspended. Not strong enough to force accountability, not weak enough to be dismissed. That uncertainty became their power. People remembered details differently. Timelines conflicted. Names were avoided. But the core questions stayed the same. What really happened in those private spaces? Who knew? And why did no one ever fully address it? According to 50 Cent, the problem was never a lack of stories. It was a lack of closure. Too many accounts ended the same way. With silence, with distance, with people choosing survival over confrontation. And over time, that silence didn't erase the accusations. It preserved them. Why they lived on? Because no one could definitively explain them away. No official denial carried enough weight. No explanation felt complete. So the questions stayed. They resurfaced every time a familiar name appeared. Every time an old pattern repeated. Every time someone hesitated before speaking. According to 50 Cent, that persistence mattered. Because false stories tend to collapse under pressure. But unresolved ones adapt. They wait. They resurface. They refuse to settle. Not proven, not gone, just unanswered. And in a system built to move on quickly, the fact that these accusations never fully disappeared may be the most important detail of all. Some connections were quietly removed from the public record. Not ended, just erased. Photos disappeared, mentions stopped. Timelines no longer matched. But according to 50 Cent, wow, those relationships didn't vanish. They were preserved privately, kept alive where no one could track them. Publicly, the association never existed. No interviews, no acknowledgments, no shared history. Privately, nothing changed. People still knew who belonged where, who had access, who moved freely without explanation. And again, Diddy's name continued to surface. Not officially, not on paper, but in the same quiet conversations that never fully went away. According to 50 Cent, these unconfirmed associations followed a familiar pattern, visible at first, then slowly withdrawn from sight, until only insiders remembered they were ever real. No announcements were made, no separations explained, because explanations create records, and records invite questions. So the connections were simply removed from public memory. But memory doesn't work the same way behind closed doors. According to 50 Cent, people still operated as if those relationships existed, because they did, just not where anyone could document them. Access remained, influence remained, familiarity remained. Only visibility was sacrificed, and that invisibility became protection. If something was never acknowledged, it couldn't be challenged. If it couldn't be challenged, it couldn't create consequences. So the relationships lived in a parallel space, erased for the public, preserved for those who needed to know. According to 50 Cent, this is why the same names keep resurfacing, why the same connections feel familiar, even when there's no record of them. Because some associations don't survive by being confirmed. They survive by being denied existence altogether. And in that denial, they continue untouched, quietly shaping outcomes while officially never having existed at all. Inside those private spaces, nothing was equal. Not access, not freedom, not consequences. According to 50 Cent, entry alone was a form of power. Who got in, who stayed out, who was invited back, and who never heard from anyone again. Influence decided everything. The closer someone was to power, the fewer rules applied to them. The farther someone was, the more careful they had to be. These weren't open environments where people moved freely. They were controlled spaces, every interaction shaped by who mattered more in the room. According to 50 Cent, age gaps inside these spaces raised quiet but serious concerns. Not discussed openly, not challenged directly, just noticed, and then ignored. Because noticing was safe, questioning was not. Once people understood the hierarchy immediately, who could speak, who should stay silent, Who could leave without consequences? And who couldn't? Power didn't need to announce itself. It was felt, in the way conversations stopped when certain people entered, in the way others adjusted their behavior instantly, in the way discomfort was absorbed instead of addressed. According to 50 Cent, these weren't just parties meant for entertainment. They were environments built on imbalance, where influence decided boundaries, and where boundaries shifted depending on who was watching. Age differences weren't explained. They weren't justified. They were simply normalized by silence. Because when power controls access, it also controls what becomes acceptable. People didn't ask why someone younger was there. They asked themselves what would happen if they spoke up, and most chose not to find out. According to 50 Cent, that fear shaped the entire atmosphere. It kept people compliant, careful, quiet. The music played, the night moved on, and the structure stayed intact. No one called it out, not because everyone agreed, but because disagreement carried risk. And that's what made those spaces dangerous. Not chaos, not lack of control, too much control. According to 50 Cent, power dictated everything: who belonged, who mattered, and whose discomfort could be ignored without consequence. And when power operates without challenge, it doesn't need rules. It becomes the rule itself. The whispers didn't come from one place. They came from everywhere, quietly, consistently, over years. These concerns involving vulnerable individuals never arrived as headlines. They arrived as warnings, as discomfort, as stories people shared only when they trusted who was listening. According to 50 Cent, these weren't isolated rumors. They followed patterns, the same types of stories, the same environments, the same silence afterward. People noticed who had power and who didn't. They noticed how easily certain individuals were pulled into private spaces and how hard it was for them to ever speak about what happened there. Nothing was written down. Nothing was reported officially because the system wasn't built to protect the vulnerable. It was built to protect itself. According to 50 Cent, this silence wasn't accidental. It was taught, reinforced, passed down as survival. If you wanted to stay close to opportunity, what you learned when not to ask questions, when not to remember too clearly, when to move on without closure. And for years, that system worked. The rumors stayed whispers, the concerns stayed private, and the patterns repeated without consequence. But silence has a limit. According to 50 Cent, pressure didn't arrive all at once. It built slowly, through repetition, through unresolved accusations, through stories that refused to disappear. Now with this new Netflix documentary, something has shifted. Not everything is revealed, not every question is answered, but the silence is no longer complete. What was once ignored is now being examined. What was once buried is now being questioned. And what was once protected by fear is finally being exposed to scrutiny. According to 50 Cent, systems built on silence don't collapse overnight. Yeah, they crack first. And this time the cracks are visible, because when the same whispers last for years, they stop being noise. They become evidence that something was wrong and that too many people knew it. The silence held for a long time, but now it's under pressure. And once silence starts to break, it never breaks quietly.